Hello, everybody. How is life? We are here for another Quack and Code episode, and we're gonna talk again about table format. It's the second time we talk about table format. We talked about Iceberg, which is finding actually a new home also to Databricks. And speaking of that, I have a guest from Databricks today, Holly Smith, that's gonna help us to talk about Delta Lake, and also how does that work with DuckDB, and a bit like how this integration at the high level is working, and we'll get to an hands-on part so that you have something to get started. So I have Holly in the backstage, and let me bring Girl here. There you go.
Hello,
Holly,
hello.
how is it going?
Very good, thank you. Really excited to be here. I was so honored when I got that message on my DMs. I was like, yes, this sounds like it's going to be fun. Let's chat about Delta for an hour and do some demos and show people what it can do.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. But let's start just a bit about your background, where actually you're coming from, and you're calling us, right? I want to know everything. So yeah.
Awesome. So I work for Databricks, as you said. I've worked for Databricks for about 5.5 years now. I have done a variety of roles here. I kind of joined as a technical account manager type person. I'll be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing. I think I was all hired because I was organized, but technical skills, I was not great. And I had to learn everything from scratch, really. And that really kind of gave me a lot of empathy when it comes to people who are new to a lot of technical things because maybe they haven't studied it at university. Anyway, so then I went on to do consulting, and I have done that for just over 4 years now. And I kind of had a bit of a moment where I realized that actually I had really a lot of fun kind of teaching people. I was an instructor for a while, and I enjoyed doing conference talks, and I enjoyed writing about things and, showing people what is a good feature to use and how it's going to help them and, make things easier for them. And so it turns out that that is a job, is called developer advocate within developer relations, and that is what I do now. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to being able to talk about Delta and things. I should say my kind of background before that was more around data science and kind of maths. So I
Mm.
do have a bit of knowledge there, but I will say I spent most of my time doing data engineering. I think there's something nice about getting something really lined up and really optimized and just making it sing.
Yeah, no, that's nice. Someone is just thinking Holly is the real mother duck. Yeah, so we'll know about that. But we for sure gonna talk about both. Yeah, it's really interesting how many people have different background on DevRel, right? Because I think it's a really specific skills niche of skill set that you need to have in the same person, right? So being able to speak, being able to be technical, doing blogs and so on. What do you enjoy the most, by the way, on your content? Where do we usually see you?
I think for me, it's when, and this is also what I liked about training as well, is seeing things click for people and, hearing about something that they'd maybe been a little bit hesitant to try because they didn't really understand it, hearing the explanation going, oh, now I get it. And like, this is how I can make it useful. And part of what I do at the moment is like a little bit of feature awareness as well. So we've brought out this new thing. It's going to do X, Y, Z. And people are like, oh, this is going to make my life so much easier. We recently brought out variant types, which is part of Delta. And the idea is you can, take something that used to be absolutely horrible with unstructured data, and now you can just kind of you can just ingest it as if it's a normal, column type. And it's going to save so many headaches for so many people. And like knowing that people hear about this and how much time it's going to save them, that's so satisfying for
Yeah.
me, for people to
No,
be able to understand that.
I get that. Like it's and I think especially if you have people like in person, because we do a lot of online stuff, right now. Coming back, I think it's always a pleasure to meet those people. So if you ever seen us at conference, will it be Holly and me? Please don't hesitate to come and chat. We are not going to eat you, promise.
I'm
Um,
also quite short in real life, and I think a lot of people are quite surprised by
oh
that. They
yeah,
kind of meet me, and I'm also normally I don't hang out with Simon, but like normally if there's a conference, Simon from Advancing Analytics is also quite there. And he's normally quite tall. Well, he's always quite tall. I think people are quite surprised when they see us next to each other, and it's kind of like, oh wow, I didn't expect it to.
Yeah,
look like that.
people make a mental image of you, and there is always surprise when you get to see in person.
Yeah.
But diving in the table format. So what do we call table format? Because Parquet is a file format, right?
Yes.
That most people know because it's kind of like the standard in analytic, and then came those table format like Delta Lake. But why is that? So is Parquet not enough?
So Parquet is a good building block, but unfortunately, we need it to do more these days. I think when it kind of originally came out, it did things that we'd not really seen from other file formats, but it wasn't quite as much as we'd maybe thought about. I think maybe I'll start maybe a little bit further back. So I used to do a lot of things with, back when I was a data scientist, I'd like grab things from somewhere like Teradata, and I'd never think about like a table being a file format. I would never think about like, what does this mean underneath? It's just kind of like select star from table and then it works. And apparently that's not how it works. There are many things underneath that kind of make things faster. Obviously, a table is a collection of data, and this is really like, this blew my mind when I think I heard about it for the first time, and it was like, yeah, these are kind of all files. We put the files together, and then the files become a table. And with the file format that you use, this starts coming together. I can see someone saying CSVs. Alex, thank you. Yeah, it's a file format, and CSVs, that's a really interesting point actually, because things like CSVs are great for humans. They're terrible for machines. If something is, you can open and you can edit and you can modify, like that's great for humans who want to interact with that data in that particular way. But there are things that we need from, when a computer is reading our data, we need things that are going to make that a lot easier. And so this is where Parquet had this idea of like a footer file. So it would store lots of interesting metadata there. So things like, what are the columns? What types are they? Are they strings? How big are those strings? And you get other information as well. So if you've got things like numerics in there, you'd have mins and maxes in there. So that would help with some things. And it's just kind of been an evolution for that. And again, one table might be multiple files underneath, and the way that we construct those files, the way that we query those files, that's the thing that can really give you the speed up. And that's why Parquet is such a great starting point to then be able to build on it. But there are some challenges with using kind of vanilla Parquet. One of the big things is around kind of schema enforcement, or like data quality enforcement. So you could say this column is a number, it's an integer, and you could put a string in it, and it just like wouldn't enforce that whatsoever. And so you'd have some really nasty surprises when you've built a particular pipeline. You've looked at the table says that this is an integer, and then you've built your pipeline, and lo and behold, it's a string, and everything breaks. And it's annoying to fix, and it's like, why is this a problem? It shouldn't be a problem.
By the way, like, just to highlight this kind of problem, because I had that multiple times, especially when you have like SQL engine of schema on read. So they read the schema when they scan all the Parquet file. And if you have one Parquet file for one table that has a different schema which is not compatible, then the query is going to get an error. And this is tricky to solve because you need to find a Parquet file can contain multiple rows. So you need to find which row in which Parquet file. Sometimes you get a good error. So like this is like a really classic problem when you don't have safety before. You have other way to do safety, but like you come on the way to it's a really tedious manual process to fix. Yeah.
It is. And like, I guess the lazy girl way to get around it is just to kind of infer your schema every single time. But that means you have to go to your entire table. Whatever engine you're using has to go through every single record to be like, are you a number? Are you a number? Are you a number? And lo and behold, it's really slow. So rubbish. rubbish performance, rubbish data quality, sadness all round. I guess the next thing about Parquet is that it was really tricky to update data, and this idea that when you were making a change to a table, because you've got a collection of files there, if you wanted to make changes to those files, that table was ineffectively kind of offline. So you then ended up with this horrible situation where if you wanted to make some big updates to a table, that would be very tricky. If you wanted to stream to a table, but then also do something that was like a little bit more complex in terms of like making changes to it within the stream, but then also reading from it as well for the next thing down, that would also be really tricky. And I remember working with one customer actually, so this is before they'd moved to Delta. They had like every click from their website from the last 5 years in this one monster table. And, for 2 hours a day, they'd have to take it offline. And then GDPR came in and they were like, we don't even know how we can delete data from like this. This is a nightmare. We cannot do this. And so you ended up with these tables with downtime, which is not what you want in the slightest.
Yeah. No, that's big point. So to recap, schema enforcement, which basically inherent data quality, a way easy to do other operation like delete, for example. And I really like how you frame that with the CSV journey, right? Because we can like for me, but this is just a data engineer talking. Like I have nothing against my CSV friends, but if I would just remove them from the equation because I had so many nightmares. But it's good because it's kind of an evolution and it's still gonna be there, right? We can but also make Microsoft Excel over there, and then there's the question: what is next after basically Parquet? So could you maybe start to talk? We talked about the pain points right now on Parquet. I like
Sorry, I
the
have just
big
seen.
features.
Yeah, sorry, I have just seen Stephanie's question of like, could you share a bit more on how to optimize Delta Lake reads? So I'm going to talk about one of the optimization things that kind of sucked in Parquet. And that was you had no control or very little control over the sizes of the files that you were writing. So you could opt for partitions, and so these were hard partitions. So they'd be like boundaries that you'd have to have in there. Normally people would have dates like the day of the year. And that's great until Black Friday comes along and you've got like one monster file, but then you've also got, I don't know, a day that it was super sunny and like no one went shopping. And so you've got like really tiny little files as well. And so that was an absolute nightmare. And then we also had things like streaming. So if it was real time, you just make lots of little tiny ones. And so that was also completely the wrong answer. And so in terms of what Delta does, it's aimed to solving a lot of these problems, but it's aiming to solve them in a way that is kind of like the smart way of doing it rather than like the long way of doing it. And there's a couple of things that happen to make that go ahead and happen. So first of all, technically, Delta is not a file type. Now, if you refer to it as a Delta table or called it a table type, like that's fine. No one's going to call you up on it. But if you're an absolute pedant, technically, it is a protocol, because what we still have those Parquet files, which are great. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a tiny bit of metadata with our Parquet files, and we're going to store them next to them wherever we're storing our Parquet files. It's going to be in JSON, and it's going to tell us a lot about our files. What files belong to what table? What are the things that we need to change? We've got some metadata in there like minimums and maximums as well, some extra metadata. And all sorts of other interesting information. So for example, this allows us to do things like add another Parquet file to add that to our table. Instead of having to like rewrite the entire thing out all over again, we can just do it in one step. And we have this concept of kind of steps now. Technically, they are called transactions. And so these, when we make a change, that's going to happen as a transaction. It's going to be an atomic commit. So this means either it completely succeeds or it completely fails. We're not going to end up with any kind of like halfway points where we're half putting things in there and then it fails. You've got a load of corrupt data. Like, no more of that. We're not doing that anymore. And then
And just
it
just to if we have like database people that are not familiar with even Parquet, this is actually a good analogy because with table format like Delta Lake, we are bringing basically database features like transaction, as you mentioned, right? That we didn't have when we use plain, classically object storage with a file format, right?
So Alex says, is it still valid Parquet within the extra metadata? You know what? I think I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah,
Mehdi, if you can do
go
the
ahead. Yeah, of
uh,
course. I'll do the
VS
maestro.
Code one. Yeah. So here's my VS Code. There we go. And so I have this table called tweet sentiment with medals. Basically, it's a bunch of like Twitter Olympic data. I used it from a live stream yesterday. What it contains doesn't really matter, but I have this data. It's the ugliest data I could find, and so that's what I went ahead and grabbed. Now, this is stored locally. You can connect to S3. We'll talk about that in a bit, but I decided for this particular event today that we would do something with just like a local table. And what we can see here is that I have a bunch of Parquet files that are linked to this particular table. And then also I have this other little metadata directory here. It's just a file that's called _delta_log. And this is where the interesting stuff starts to happen. So if I go ahead and look at this JSON file, oh, I hope I haven't made any changes. We can see we've got some interesting information here. So we can see the timestamp of when I made it. This is my user ID. We can see the operation that I did. We can see that I did it as an append. I can see kind of partition values and all of these other things that are happening here. And all of this like beautiful metadata that makes it so much easier for Delta to be able to make smart kind of decisions about this. Now, this should in here somewhere link to a bunch of files. Sorry, this is not very clear.
I think you can to format it won't hurt the file if you just command P and format the JSON. Normally, in VS Code, you can format the JSON.
Ooh, sorry. Command P?
Command Shift P. The magic palette. Command Shift P.
Yeah, Command Shift P is.
Yeah, you're there. Yeah, you're there. Oh. And then you do format. Yeah, format document.
Oh, sorry. I'm a bit of a princess. I'm used to like Databricks notebooks, and so like coming out of my comfort zone to
So you know what? I'm super happy because at least you got out something from this live stream.
Yeah. All right. So here's some interesting things. So we've also got in here. So there we go. We can see here that what I did is I appended some data, and it's saying here is the file that I added. And if I look down here for 00078A2, I can see that this is the Parquet file here. And so it's not, I don't want to say it's not magic. Like being able to read through these, it's really useful. You'll have the add files, you'll have the remove files. And so what's happening is like when I'm doing select star from Twitter data, what it's doing is it's looking for this delta log. It's seeing the most recent, JSON file that I have. And then it is going and just seeing like which are the files that are relevant, which are the ones that I should be querying. So hopefully this hasn't completely bamboozled people. If you have got questions, I really do want to make sure that this is understandable. So if you have questions, I'd love to answer them as they're coming in. But yeah, this is
so just coming back, sorry, to the Alex question, is it still a valid Parquet file with the extra metadata? Yes, it is. So you can play around and you could query this specific Parquet file like you would any standard Parquet file, right?
Yes. So you could do that. There is nothing like physically stopping you from doing that. What I would say is the way that we handle deletes is quite interesting. So we've got this new feature. It's called deletion vectors. It's just definitely something you can use with DuckDB. It makes things like reads faster. But ultimately, when we delete data, the delta log basically says, pretend to delete this data. Just don't read from it anymore. It doesn't actually go to the Parquet file and like delete the Parquet file. It just says, don't read this bit anymore. So if you are using a particular version of a table, and let's say my latest thing that I did was like delete from this table where, I don't know, there's offensive Twitter data in there, which is not everything, surprisingly. Maybe I deleted some tweets that I didn't want to see in there. If I go ahead and like directly query that Parquet file, it's still going to have that in there. But if I query via the delta log, as like treat it as a delta table, then it is going to have that kind of latest view of the data, and so it is going to be kind of like the up-to-date version that you should be looking at.
Yeah. So the long story short is that you can query. It is a Parquet. No, that's great. It is a standard Parquet file, but it doesn't make much sense to query this one if you are using Delta Lake, because you are basically you need to see this view where you have perform delete and so on, which might still be in those files. We have a couple of questions actually. Do you want to tackle them?
Yeah, these are great questions.
Okay. How do you know what JSON log to view? What if you have like 50,000 delta logs?
So you only get like one delta log form, like one delta log file or subdirectory per table. So it's always going to, it's like a one-to-one mapping. It's always going to look in there, and it's always going to pick the latest version. So you don't have to, like, it's really simple to use. You literally do like select star from Twitter data, and it's always going to bring you the most up-to-date version. If you have 50,000 in there, that's fine. It's always going to bring you kind of 50,000. I would say when you get to 50,000, that is quite a lot. There are some things that you can do to kind of compact those files to get rid of like the old stale versions. Like, do you really need that version from like 2.5 months ago? Probably not. So there are extra commands that you can do to kind of tidy that up. So, you know, having a couple of 100,000, maybe 10,000 kind of JSON files is fine. But depending on the engine, it might struggle a little bit, it might chuck. So there is some maintenance that you can do with your Delta files to keep it to the latest versions that you normally care about. We normally say keep about 7 days worth of, you know, versions. That tends to do well for most people. I think that's the default. And oh gosh, you are testing me now. This is definitely a feature I think that is coming out soon, is the ability to just set a default retention period and say, you know what, I only want the last 7 days worth of JSON files, get rid of everything else, and then I never have to think about it again. So Emo, I hope that answers your question. So in theory,
no, you don't need to know. The framework will just do it for you. But that's also bring a great question, like when you start to scale in how many version you need to have. And actually, it's a really good point, because I've seen so many, both in database and you know, in data lake, people over versioning their data, like literally dumping every day their backup data. Same for the data for a data lake with, like, you know, a real hard copy, so it's not metadata. And the thing is that with Delta Lake, if you do versioning, you're not you're just gonna be versioning, you know, smartly the difference rather than a full copy, right? So that's much more efficient in term if there are storage. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I also see Daniel's question of, can I do insert into Parquet table? If you are using Delta, I would strongly advise that you do not mess around with the actual Parquet files underneath. Just query the Delta table as is. So you can do, I really wouldn't recommend it. And the reason for that is all those statistics that we had on the screen of the JSON of, you know, the mins, the maximums, when was this last updated, who made the update, all of that is going to become completely invalid if you're going and kind of manually doing things to those Parquet files. Now, can you go ahead and do insert into, okay, like when someone inserts into like the Delta file, that's fine. The log will handle all of those bits and pieces.
Yeah.
So
And just to coming back to the question of Daniel, the write feature is not yet support with DuckDB because he asked inside DuckDB, right? Soonish.
soon.
But basically you need exactly. So Daniel will just okay, I got it. I do insert into Delta table. Yes, it is. You always play basically with the Delta level view rather than going on Parquet. Here we basically, it's funny the interesting question we have because you break it down with VS Code that is Parquet logs. But don't mess around with those files. They are there just for learning purpose and understand how the framework is built in general.
So maybe we should talk through like how I would expect someone to use this. So the way that I kind of like thought about someone, would really benefit from using this. So first of all, Delta has a huge ecosystem. And I kind of had in mind, you're working with this other team, and they're like, "Great news! Your data is ready. Here it is. Here it is in Delta in an S3 bucket. Here's the location of your pop." There is a connection that you can do with S3. So, maybe if I could grab my screen
Yeah.
grab. So I can think of a way to set up secrets and like not accidentally live stream the stuff that I need. So
No worries. This is how you do it. You know it. You wait. You set up your secrets and then you share it.
yeah, so I'm such a klutz with this stuff. Like I knew I would just completely
No,
mess
it's
it up.
it's really hard on live stream. It's like everybody. If you haven't leaked a secrets on live stream, you're not a real live streamer. So welcome to the club.
I thought it was a high risk strategy, so I didn't want to do it. Anyway, so what you'd have is you'd have your I've spelled S3 wrong. Brilliant. You'd have your secret that you've created with S3, and then you literally do select star from and use delta scan as the keyword, and then S3, the bucket name. And if you're working with like Unity Catalog and Databricks, it might look something like this, but otherwise it will just look like some generic kind of like file path. And you can just go ahead and query that and, use it just like you would anything else in DuckDB. So kind of very simple to kind of go ahead and get started. So that's like one way that I thought people might be working together.
Yeah.
Another thing is it might not just be like, here's your data, off you pop, see you whenever. If you have data that's being constantly updated and you want to be able to get always the latest version of this particular data, so maybe this table is being updated every hour because it's Delta, there's going to be no downtime. Even if it's being streamed to, so you like micro batch updates that are happening kind of like every half second, you're still going to get the latest version. So you can get like really real-time data with something that's happening here. There's also no issues in terms of multiple people reading from the same table either. So, you might have kind of like different components writing to it. You can be reading from it, other people can be reading from it in multiple ways. And because we have this idea of like the Delta log with the different Delta versions, that means that you're always going to get the latest version. You're not going to bump into each other. You're not going to have some of those, more traditional kind of like database problems that you might have had in the past, kind of legacy systems. So it's a really nice way to be able to get that latest kind of up-to-date data you are working on. So that's kind of what I thought of in my mind when, who would be using it like this. And I think this is a really neat way of doing it.
Yeah, no, that's great. We have a question, by the way, which is, I'm not sure if you actually know if it does parallel reads at the moment with partition involved. I'm pretty sure it's, I see multi-thread, yes, multi-parallel reads. And I think I don't see why, if there is partition involved, it wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But to be confirmed.
So I'm going to maybe say something a bit controversial here, but in terms of partitioning Delta files, sorry, can we go back to my screen?
Yeah.
Okay,
There
so
we go.
these files here that I've got, this is just me like faffing about doing some stuff. It's not necessarily like me choosing how I want to partition my files because I know it's quite small. That example that I gave to you earlier of like maybe I have really big data and it is, you know, partitioned by day. We can define that like data from day one should never be in the same file as data from day two. You might have multiple files for day one and only one for day two, but you can set those hard limits on like where these partitions should be. Now, if those partitions, like if you've got more than a gigabyte of data to put within one partition, you know, go ahead and do it. But the way Delta is evolving is moving away from partitioning and having a different way to kind of optimize that data. So is it multi-threaded? Yes. Are you going to get distribution across your partitions? Yes, but it's not necessarily the best way to optimize your data layout. That's a story for another time, but I hope that answers your question.
No, that's great. And just looking at the time, I think what I wanted to let me see
sorry,
if there is.
Sorry, there was one other question, which is from shy LinkedIn user who did not share their name. Can we expect DuckDB integration with Unity catalog anytime soon? So I appreciate this is a Delta stream, but yes, there is a integration that is being worked on at the moment. We had our big conference a couple of months ago that was demoed. Very early stages, very risky demo, but it worked, so
Yeah.
I can't complain. And there is also a couple of features that are coming out from Delta as well that are going to make that a lot easier as well. So maybe that's for later when we've got like more time, because that's a very nuanced conversation about a new feature that's coming up. But yes, let's go back to our agenda before I go on too many tangents.
Of course. So yeah, I want to talk maybe a bit about the different Delta projects. So you have the let me share my screen. We have the Delta kernel. We have the Delta Lake, and so this is like a bit confusing for people when they look for open source, GitHub Delta Lake. It's like, why is there, so many repository that seems to do the same thing? So let me just share my screen, and not my email, probably. So wait a minute.
Do you want to share do you want to share my other screen and I can talk through like why?
Yeah, of course.
So many.
Yeah, wait a minute. I'm gonna do that right now. You have another screen that is sharing right now?
Maybe.
No, you just have to.
All right, let's go for screen number 2. There we go.
Yeah.
So Delta Lake is an open source project. We have enormous amount of contributors. The amount of downloads is getting pretty staggering pretty quickly, and we have this big ecosystem. This is great. We love open source. We love getting these integrations. We know that a lot of people can benefit from this technology. And originally, we just kind of built one connector per provider. So it's like, oh, do you want a Delta integration with Flink? Cool, build an integration. Do you want one with Beam? Cool, let's build a second one. And we've had maybe like 8 new features come out in the past couple of years. 7 more are planned. And it turns out that if you have this many integrations, it's kind of like, thanks for building the connector. By the way, we've brought out something else. And it's like, oh, okay, we'll put it on the backlog. When can we get, oh, we've just, announced something else new and now something else new. And it's a very quick way to not ingratiate yourself with an open source community. So, and of course, like with a lot of technologies, we also have that divide between Team Java and then Team Rust. So for some reason, Rust and Python is split out in this diagram, but think of them kind of similar. And then there's like the C++ implementation, which is where DuckDB sits in. And so we've also got these kind of 2 different integrations as well. And so the idea is to kind of really simplify this. Instead of having like 50 odd connectors that need to be upgraded every single time there's a new feature, why don't we try and build some kind of interpretation that is going to make this integration a lot easier? And this is called Delta kernel. A lot of very smart people have been working on like, how do we make this a lot easier? How do we move away from this idea that like every single project needs its own upgrade?
Yeah.
So in terms of like, why are there so many projects? It's like, well, we've got the original one, and then we have the we've got the Rust kernel integration, and then we also have the Java, the JVM kernel integration as well. And I think one of the questions I got beforehand about this, actually, I think if I go to here, you will see that the Delta extension is currently experimental. That's because it runs using this new kernel for Delta. That's why it's currently experimental at the moment. Now, what does experimental mean? This means don't put your like critical production workloads on here. Like the API does have a few little kind of bugs and quirks that we are working through. So, use it for everyday analytics. Please don't put this at the center of like a $10 million pipeline that you need. Otherwise, you're going to get fined by the regulator if you don't get it right. So, I think, that's generally where I kind of draw the line when it comes to experimental, but it is very close to getting a lot of that squashed and getting this out of experimental. It is quite new. I think it was announced a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
So, still early days. It's not, I want to be very clear that, this is not buggy. There are a few kind of little quirks here and there, but it's not like on Monday it worked and then on Tuesday it failed. Like it's not going to be like that. And there's a lot of, in terms of the functionality that has been committed, like that works very well.
But it is great. So the point is to open, where you can actually use Delta and, increase the velocity of the features rather than developing here and there multiple times the same thing. And Delta RS was a project that started kind of the same way, right? Initially, it was, oh, we need to be able to easily use Python with Delta Lake or Rust. And so this project was started as a community, and now they're using also, I believe, the Delta kernel for Delta RS, so which is also a Docker library in Python where you can read Delta Lake table, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. And I do want to point out that it's also a real kind of community effort to build this kernel. This isn't, the Delta crew being like, we're going to build a kernel and you're going to like it. That's not how it works at all. It's very much working with the community to be like, would this kind of thing work? Like, would this kind of thing work? So things like I don't want to go too much into, I don't want to bore people too much, but things like with the Rust integration, like it's using Arrow as a way to transfer data. How do people feel about this? Oh, it turns out people like Arrow, so Arrow's going to go in there. So yeah, this isn't kind of like some project dictating what the rest of the ecosystem is going to put up with. It's very much a kind of collaborative thing for the community.
Yeah, I want to bring that topic. I mean, Steph so by the way, Steph is a coworker of mine. So she actually worked on the Delta Lake integration with Mother Duck. So she asked, could you share if there will be at some point Iceberg kernel RS? And I think a bigger maybe question is like, given the acquisition of Tabular, which was responsible mostly of Iceberg, which is another table format by Databricks, where do you see, you don't need to, give Databricks opinion, but like just on a high level, where do you see heading through in terms of, the data industry with those different table format today? And like, should I pick Iceberg? Should I pick Delta Lake? And now everything is under Databricks, I would say, hat. So what's your thought on this?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So in terms of the challenges that people had with Parquet, like that was fairly universal. And then we ended up with kind of 3 major teams of people trying to solve the same problems and doing it in a slightly different way. So you've got Delta, you've got Iceberg, and you've got Hootie. And if you close one eye and squint with the other, they kind of look the same. Don't tell them I said that. But like, I'm imagining if I told my mom about these things, she'd be like, Holly, what are you on about? Just shut up. we all agree that Parquet is a great starting point, and we all agree that like metadata is a way to kind of solve this, but it's kind of a different school of thought of like, where should this metadata go? So if you look at Delta, they're like, hey, we should keep it next to all the other files, and like that makes sense. If you are, with Iceberg, they're like, oh, but actually we should keep the metadata, we should put that with a catalog. And I've completely blanked on where Hootie put their metadata, but they do it in a
Yeah.
completely different way as well. And it seems kind of silly that if 95% of the things that you're writing out are technically Parquet files, and like it's a sliver of metadata on top, why not just like write out 3 sets of metadata and have them kind of work together? And
Yeah.
so this is where Delta Uniform comes in. And so not only do you get the Delta log, but you can also get it into the catalog as well. We have this idea, there's a feature that's coming out soon called coordinated commits, which means that not only can you read from these different tables, because if you think about it, if I make a table, I write out my Delta log, and then I write out something in the catalog. Reading from it is fine because I can just like refer to the data wherever it is. But if I want to write to it, it's like, ooh, which, if I write to the catalog, but then I need to like read from the log. So today, it's not the greatest story. There's a lot of reading from, but not a lot in the way of writing.
Yeah.
And the idea is that if we can get these kind of 3 metadata files to commit all at the same time, doesn't really matter which one that you go for, candidly,
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that more as the communities kind of move closer together, and we are seeing this as kind of like, team, this is all a headache that we all have. Can we like figure out a way to solve this?
Yeah.
Like, does it matter that the syntax says Hootie rather than Iceberg? Like, whatever. The challenge does come in terms of the feature interoperability. So, for example, the way that deletes are handled, that's different between the different projects. There's a couple of other things that are like implemented in one but not implemented in the other. So, there is a lot of smart minds that have to work together to solve that kind of problem, and that's where the tabular acquisition comes in. This is not taking away one project. This is not kind of like burning one to the ground. Absolutely not. This is the idea of like, how can we take great features from the various projects and make them work together? So this idea of like, well, which one should I pick? Hopefully it shouldn't matter in the future.
Yeah, no, but that's great to hear, because I think it's the data stack is already really complex these days with the explosion of tools, and I think we've been asking for consolidation at different levels, and I think this one is a great one, because like the way that you store your data is kind of like a critical choice, right? You don't want to do multiple migration. Some people argue that we, as data engineer, the only work we ever done is migration. And so hopefully that will change in the futures. We already have 15 minutes left. Do you want to jump on the demo?
Yeah.
I'm happy also to show stuff if I'll fix quickly my share screen, but you can go ahead if you want first.
Right. So here's one I set up earlier. So I'm just going to start by installing Delta and then loading Delta, and my file is kind of in this mess. So I can do select star from, and then the keyword to use is Delta scan. And in here, I'm going to put the location, which I have copied. And I hope this works. And if it doesn't, I'm going to look very silly.
I can go 10, and 10 if I fail, it's fine.
Hey,
Yeah,
it's
that's great.
worked. I'm as shocked as everyone else is.
Just a comment. So this is a local table, right?
Yes,
And
this isn't an S3 one.
yeah, this is a local table. You don't need actually to install and load because DuckDB have special hooks that would install and load the extension for you. And there is a hook on Delta Scan. No, so that you know. So it's true that for certain extension in DuckDB, like Geo, it's always good sometimes to install and load, because there is a hook for all the function within an extension, but for basic scan, that is. Yeah, so here there is, you're doing a describe. right? To
Yeah,
show
so
the
just to find
schema.
out, I've got loads of things in here. I tried to make some really kind of ugly data, and I've got things like hashtags, which is a an array that I made. Here's one I made earlier. And I can go ahead, select the hashtags that I've got from my data. And again, I've got some interesting things that are here. I think it's explain. You also get some interesting things that come out of explain as well. So, I mean, aside from this is just like boring old SQL, but I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about file format only for me to be like, anyway, and then you can do select star from this table.
No, but it is like it is a lot of work to do, and there is a couple of features I pointed to the documentation. So if you go to DuckDB documentation, you have a Delta Lake page with the features that is supported, and so at the moment it's read only, but it is write coming soon. What kind of application would you say, like at this point of time with the CLI, people could use it within their workflow?
Yeah, so definitely, in terms of the reading, I have been very impressed. I was playing around with this yesterday. I've been very impressed with how fast this is for local development, and also just to get set up to be able to very quickly get started with a Delta file. I think that's probably the fastest way to do it. And there's also some other things. So when it comes to, I mean, you can probably call me on this. When it comes to more complicated joins, again, you should never feel any kind of stickiness or any slowness, because you should get a lot of the, speed ups. I appreciate the data might not be as kind of chunky as, something like what you do with Databricks, where you're doing kind of petabytes of data. But yeah, you should really notice the kind of slickness of this. I would also say I've seen a few anecdotal things about DuckDB being like, anyway, so we're faster than the people who originally created that technology using this thing. So yeah, I've been really impressed with how fast it is. But I guess if you're used to working with things that are local, like maybe speed isn't a consideration from you. But yeah, this really shouldn't chug. This isn't a case of like setting something to run and then coming back after a coffee. Like this should be super easy. And then also
just a word on that. So I get that because I'm mostly using DuckDB, but still using here and there BigQuery or Spark sometimes. And I get this thing where I feel like those technologies getting slower, which is not true. But it is because it's kind of like the same effect, like where you get a new laptop or a new smartphone and you say, it's super fast. And then 2 years later, we say, this is so slow. And maybe you had a lot of things going on, but it's also just your brain, which is getting used to the new speed. And it's just impossible, really hard to, kind of find this new reference. But
I got to say, like that phenomenon, I notice it more when it comes to headphones. And you're like, my headphones are fine. And you buy new headphones, or you get new headphones from somewhere, and you're like, oh, it's bliss, it's music. Like, it's beautiful.
And then after 1 month, you forget about it. We had a comment that someone said, like, it's loading super fast. Indeed.
So this is, gosh, how big is this? I think this is around 10,000 records. You've got some really gnarly types in here. So like the array type, that's not, that's like they're all kind of like fast types, but there are some things in here like the tweets, the data itself, the text. Like this is a really long string. It's full of emojis. Like you can't like ASCII encode this. Like this is super long. Again, we have those hashtags, which are quite, some of them are quite chunky because people go nuts with their Twitter hashtags. And again, it's like a variable length as well. So yeah, it is. Sorry, keep asking me questions. I was going to write out a join and just show you literally. I tried to think of like what was the most hideous query I could write about this data.
You can. So Alexandre, how you're doing, Alexandre? I think we met. Yes, we met in DuckDB in Paris meetup. He's asking, would it be better to have an uniform connector on DuckDB instead of a Delta Lake, Iceberg plus UDI one? And I think like my thoughts first, that I'm curious to hear yours, all is that everything is still early. Like this acquisition and this merge in terms of like not only in company but in terms of standards, it's still early. So I think from the DB point of view, it makes more sense to focus on different extension at this point of time. Do you want to add something on that?
So I guess, sorry, in terms of like a uniform connector, so it's more about kind of like, how do you want to read your metadata? I'm not sure. I, I don't think we'll get to a point anytime soon where it's like, and use any metadata. I don't know. Maybe that's a feature request that should go in. But this kind of omnivore way in like choosing the metadata, I've not seen that on any roadmaps yet. So I think just sticking to like a Delta read or an Iceberg read or a Hoodoo read or whatever, I think that's going to be enough from an end user perspective. Now, if you're an architect and you're looking after 10,000 data engineers, great feature request, and I'm definitely going to take that back. Like that's going to be really beneficial. But I think as an end user, it's just knowing that some of that stuff is there.
Yeah, someone is asking also, if I start a VM with a lot of memory and load delta table in DuckDB, can I continue with that as in-memory DuckDB database without triggering a new scan? So the best practice would be you can load it as a DuckDB table. You load it from your delta if you need cache, because if you need to trigger easily reading from an object storage, that would trigger another scan. There is another beginner question. Can I ask, where do I write my table object? Is the delta table itself or another layer like Hive Metastore? I'll let you answer that.
So I'm assuming that when you're talking about if you are reading in Delta, unfortunately today you cannot write out in Delta. So you would be writing out in kind of the available choice for kind of format. If you are looking at this as part of a bigger picture in terms of like, where does someone else need to write out their delta for you to be able to read it, you've got two main choices. So you either have I guess the main one is kind of S3 is probably the best option.
Yeah.
So Amazon S3. If you are not in a Amazon or AWS environment, that does make it a little bit trickier. So that would be a way that you could grab that file from your local machine. I think there's a couple of creative ways that you can do that. But yeah, you're probably looking at S3 if you're like working with a wider team.
Yeah. I want to show something. So let me just.
Sorry, maybe I should
Yeah.
better answer that question. If you have a Hive Metastore, you can like point a table to a particular area in S3. So that is called a managed table. No, it's not. What's the opposite of managed? Not unmanaged.
Self-hosted.
No. What is it called? External.
External,
It makes
sorry.
no sense. Yeah, opposite of manage, obviously external. Yeah, so if you've got an external table, so if someone's using a Hive Metastore, you can point to a specific location in an S3, get them to write it there, and then you'll be able to do it. All right, Medi's going to show me how to do a proper demo now.
No, that's not true. That's not true. And the topic is on half. You're from Databricks, Delta, so I think you deserve as much credit as I have. No, I wanted to show, so we already show for local, and I wanted to show if you use MotherDuck, you can, so we talked about local workflow, right? You have a local database, but so of course you can, so if I have a DuckDB CLI, and by the way, this is really important, we show the DuckDB CLI is in 3 points, but DuckDB has multiple clients, so you can do exactly the same in Python, in Java, if that's your vibe, or so this is not limited to the CLI, right? It's available in the different extension. So if you create a secret, and then you can read, for example, this is reading a pretty large, more than 1 million table from S3. And so this is doing a delta scan, and I'm just doing a limit. So let me do a timer just gonna add the timer. So this is reading directly from S3. And we'll see, okay, about 4 seconds. Now I can basically do the same query, but from MotherDuck. And the good thing about that is that you don't have your network traffic is happening in the cloud, and you're gonna just retrieve you locally on the client, what you need. So it's kind of like the same setup when you are in notebook. Most of the compute is happening on the server. So I'm just opening again another DuckDB. I'm gonna connect to MotherDuck. I actually don't need, I can create the secrets, but I have already a secret store on MotherDuck side. And just to show you, this is, where it is, it's there, sorry. This is how you create a secret. It's gonna basically take your secrets based on your local credential from AWS if you sign in with AWS SSO, and store it securely on MotherDuck. And then you can do basically the exact same query. And I'm gonna put a timer on again. And whoop. And you see, so that was much faster. This is just a basic limit 5. I'm not going to go because we're running a bit of time, but I had like a more complicated query over this data set, which is around, about 2 million rows, so 2 GB size. And so if you get like more complex query where you do aggregate, some parsing in string, as you see here, it's data about PyPI statistic. Actually, if you do that locally, so on my left side, that would get much, again, much slower. And if you go on the right, it's using directly MotherDuck serverless compute and return you the result. So yeah, just wanted to highlight the workflow that, of course, you can still query from local. I think a Delta table, like as you mentioned, Holly, is working great. When you start to query on S3, I think you need just to be more careful about your network bandwidth, how good your internet connection is, about the filters, if you have partition that you can push down the filters, or you can use also MotherDuck as well as compute.
Yeah, I think also something that's probably really worth considering for people like myself and Mehdi who are based in EMEA is that if your data is in S3 and it's halfway across the planet, like connecting locally is not, like you're just going to have latency, like regardless of the tool that you're using.
Yeah, that's very true. That's fair. That those baguettes are actually in US, and infrastructure for the moment of MotherDuck are based in US. Looking back again to the chat, if we have other question, I'm basically wondering where should I create my schema object for OLAP workloads. So this is, I think Emo is kind of like looking where, with the database analogy, where do I create my, my schema first? Do you see what I mean?
Yes. So the way that we've been showing using Delta at the moment, there is no kind of schema that you are using with it. So you don't have to have, sorry, when you say schema, I don't know whether you mean like database schema or table
Yeah,
schema.
I think it's that. I think
Okay.
it's a kind of like the
Database
process.
schema.
Yeah, the process where I think what is confusing here, it's simply that, yeah, you define a schema with the data itself versus a database. You're going to prepare often the schema and then you load the data.
Yeah, so there's no need to necessarily do that with the implementation that we've shown here. You don't have to set that up. Now, technically, when I set this up myself and I read from a Unity catalog table in an S3, it's again, it's that thing of like, it's just all files. It's files all the way down. And, there's a file location or a folder, which is my catalog name, and then some other bits and pieces. And then there's a database name, and then another, we keep going down the file locations, down the file path until we get to a table. So if you know that you have to read from table temp, and it's in, default or whatever, but which schema or which database it's in, that will be in the file path, and they've normally got like the name of the schema.db
Yeah.
as part of that file path. So if you're wondering like where it is that you're reading these from, to be able to like find where this database is or where this catalog is, spoilers, it's normally in the file name or the file path, I should say.
Yeah. Cool. We're gonna close in because the time already passed. We have a couple of questions, but I'm happy to follow up. Where can we find you, Holly, easily? It's LinkedIn. Can I share your LinkedIn, or where are you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was tagged in this event, so by all means, if you like to hear about Delta things, if you like to hear about other things that are going on in the open source space, but also maybe a bit of Databricks stuff, I do post kind of like very quick videos about what is available and what is coming up and what is new, and kind of other optimization tools or techniques that you might want to use. So yeah, if you just search for like Databricks Holly, I come up like on various platforms. So by all means, go for that.
Yeah, cool. I just share for the YouTube people, your people following us on YouTube, your LinkedIn, and also you have the Mother Duck Slack. If you have a question around Mother Duck and DuckDB, please don't hesitate to come around. Holly, that was a pleasure. Time flies. Was pretty fun. We had a lot of questions. Thank you very much for joining us again. Hopefully it's not going to be the last one we do with Databricks. I could bring the others of your people, or you can come back anytime.
Yeah,
honestly,
I would love to come back when I know that integration, Unity catalog integration is a bit stronger. I'd love to come back and talk about that.
Let's do that. When we have the Unity catalog and maybe the rights on Delta Lake, I think that we're going to be much also a lot. Yeah, not spoil secrets, because product people are going to hammer on you. Anyway, this was Quack and Code. We are here every other week, and the next time we're going to talk about geospatial data with DuckDB. It's one of the biggest use cases of DuckDB itself, and we're going to understand why with some pragmatic case. I'm not going to spoil yet about the guest, but it'd be hopefully as awesome as I had today with Holly. So I wish you all a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are, and I'll